All right, let's dive in.
Dive in?
Dive in.
Okay. So introduction to Wized. Okay, we can move on to the next slide now. Okay, so what we'll be talking about today, and as we said, me and Kyle are gonna tag team this. I'll start off by talking about spectrum of site features. What we mean by that is just that when me and Kyle were talking about this, we felt like it was really useful to talk about Wized within the context of kind of the scope of what you can achieve when building out web applications, websites, online experiences in general, just because there's such a wide range of what you can achieve there. So we want to talk about what Wized adds to the equation within the context of kind of the very simple things that you can build for the web versus the very complex. Webflow CMS versus Wized plus external data. Kyle's going to be taking that one for you. Technical overview is where we're going to dive into the interface of Wized. We'll kind of deviate a little bit from this and look at the actual interface, see how it hooks up to Webflow, look at how it works in action with like a Webflow project. Wized for authentication, that's going to be specifically with regard to the membership and login capabilities associated with Wized, and then Wized for apps as well, as kind of looking into how it pushes into that space where it can kind of move into the world of apps versus just kind of complementary to websites and data and so on and so forth. Key considerations and use cases. I'll wrap it up with that. That's basically going to be a summary of mine and Kyle's conversation yesterday when we were kind of figuring out what the key points were that we've kind of discussed and concluded whilst we were doing research and kind of looking into this together. So starting off with a spectrum of site features, we can move on. So this is what we were envisioning when we say like spectrum of sites. So it's just the idea of kind of moving from the super simple landing page version of websites, web spaces, right up the way to the complex web apps. So we're talking like the Facebooks, the Google Maps of the world. Very complex web applications, a lot of high-tech stuff going on behind the scenes. Landing page, obviously, we all know we can build those in a day, publish them in a day, have visitors by the morning. Very simple, minimal interactions. And then, of course, the space in between those two things is huge, and there's a massive amount of things that you can build, things that you can achieve in that space. And the thing we wanted to point out first of all is that Webflow can only take you so far across that space. So yes, we can make landing pages with Webflow. We know that we can make cool marketing sites. We know that we can make marketing sites that are both static and dynamic, but there is a wall that you hit when it comes to complex integrations, when it comes to complex applications. Certain business models, certain business services simply aren't catered for by Webflow in and of itself. So the membership site is where we're saying is like the next stage of this. You know, as we're aware by now, Webflow is currently building membership capabilities. It's in beta at the time of making this presentation. Word on the street is that it needs a lot of work in its current form, and it's probably not going to be ready to be competitive in this space in the very near future. But there are apps that people use to integrate with Webflow to be able to introduce membership capabilities. MemberStack is the really big one. Kyle works with MemberStack a lot. He's the person to ask any specific questions about that. And essentially, you know, it does what it says in the tin. It's going to allow you to have these personalized login experiences. It's going to allow you to have content that is gated and that is allowed access via the logins. And then the next stage of this is going to be pushing from just the membership capabilities into the web app space. So from mine and Kyle's discussions, I would kind of summarize this as just moving to the point where you're really working with data so that you can create a very dynamic, personalized experience within the like membership login space. I feel like I articulated that poorly, but you know what I mean. So this is where we're kind of thinking that Wized fits in. What can Webflow do with Wized? Well, Webflow can get you this far, and Wized can push you into this space where you have this flexibility when it comes to the data that you're working with, and you can kind of create these dynamic apps. There's a lot you can do with that. There's a lot you can do with that Webflow can't achieve by itself. There's a lot you can do with that MemberStack also can't achieve in conjunction with Webflow. So if you're building something in here, you don't need Wized. Yeah, so that's the kind of blue line, that's the Webflow line.
And I think the important thing is sometimes, like if there's, we've actually got a lot of people joining us right now that are, seem to be very well versed and have played with Wized. But for anyone that might be watching later, just to be clear, this isn't like an either or, right? This isn't like, oh, should I use Webflow or Wized? It's no, like you might not need to use Wized because you just need Webflow. So I think that's the consideration we were trying to get here, is that this isn't an either or. And then next, go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, and just like you might not want to use Wized for a simple membership site either. There's a case to argue that if you need a membership site, if you want a dynamic site that has membership capabilities, yes, Wized can do that for you. But because Wized is a more complex tool that offers more in the way of kind of flexibility and no code flexibility at that than something like MemberStack, maybe it's overshooting what it is that you need to achieve your goals. So there are things that you can do with MemberStack that Wized can do, but maybe MemberStack is the way to go because it's a quicker and more efficient route to kind of achieve what it is that you're setting out to achieve.
So if you had a requirement that you had to have your user table or, your database of all your users, it had to be in Airtable or some other database, then yeah, you'd maybe look at Wized for doing like a simple membership site. If you didn't have that requirement, it's probably easier for you to just go with MemberStack or Outseta or something. So even though it can do this stuff, like Rachel's saying, it might just be easier for you to not use Wized in that situation. So let's talk. So as I was going through all of the tutorials and the videos and playing around with things, like I kind of had a light bulb moment for me. And that was thinking about the Webflow CMS versus Webflow and Wized and external data. So if we look at how a typical Webflow website is set up, you generally create your collection. You've got, your different fields that you're creating. And so as we all know, you go and you create your collection, you add your fields, and then you go into your collection page. And then what you're doing is you're building out that page, and then you're effectively mapping your collection fields to your elements on your page, right? Through the little gear, the gear, and then you're mapping it to which collection is it, and then which field in the collection. And so you end up with these dynamic pages. So that's how we get dynamic data from our Webflow CMS into a page on our website. With Wized, it's a little different, actually. What we're going to do with Wized is we're actually going to create, instead of a Webflow CMS collection, we're actually going to store our data externally. We're going to store our data in Airtable or what was the one that people were just talking about? Or Xano is another one that people have mentioned, or you might have your own database with some webhooks, or Firebase was the one that people were talking about. So you might have you'll have your data elsewhere, but then inside of Webflow, what you're actually doing is, since you don't have a Webflow CMS collection, you don't have a collection page. So what you're doing is you're creating static pages in Webflow. And you are, think of your template page of your collection, you're just creating a static page. And then what you're doing is inside of Wizzed, you are pulling in that data from your external source as a resource is what they call it in Wizzed. You're pulling it in as a resource in Wizzed, and then Wizzed also, by hooking up Wizzed to your Webflow project, it's pulling in the pages. And so right inside of Wizzed, you've got this resource, which is your data. You've got your UI. And then what you're doing is you are, you are mapping the data from inside. Oh, it auto-corrected, but you, from inside of Wizzed, you're mapping your data to these different elements. So that is how you hook up your external data with your Webflow site inside of Wizzed. So there's kind of a shift where it's, when you think about your web app, if you have, let's say you're making a to-do app, where you've got a list of all of the to-do list items, and then you have, if you click into that that item, maybe you have a new page that is just dedicated. It's that like item detail page. Well, you have two static pages. You've got like your overview, your index page, and you've got your detail page. And through Wizzed, using different URL parameters and whatnot, basically your whole app is just those two pages, right? You've got login and forgot password and all that stuff, and maybe like an account page, but really the core of your app is just those two pages. So that was like a kind of a light bulb moment for me, realizing like, oh, when I'm using Wizzed, I'm not using CMS collections anymore. I'm using external data and static pages. So that was kind of a big thing. So now the next thing I want to do, I'm going to kind of jump back and forth between the presentation and different things, but let's dive into hooking up our project in Wizzed to Webflow. And it's actually pretty simple. There was one little place where I got caught up, but let me, if I can yeah, there we go. Okay. So, what's going to happen is when you're inside of Wiz, you, on your dashboard, you'll see here, I'm on my left on my dashboard, you'll create a new project. And when you create a new project, they're going to give you two links that you're going to copy into your project. So we've got our, paste this into the head. As we've all done this before, here's my no code collab website. I'm going to go to my project settings and I'm just pasting it into the custom code. So I'm doing it into the head here. You can see I've got my Wizzed link right here. And so that's the first thing. Now, the second thing that kind of tripped me up, it said, paste this code into the body section. And really, actually, what this is there should be a closing tag there. There should be a forward slash, because it goes into the before body, or the before closing body tag. And so that, it's super easy as well. It should say that right there, but that's where you paste it as well. So right from inside your custom code, you're just going to take the two things that they've given you and paste them right inside your custom code. That is all that you need to do to hook up your Wizzed project to Webflow. You'll need to, of course, publish your project, but then once you publish your project, you'll come back out, it will check for it, and then it'll say that your project has been verified or validated or whatever, and then it'll show up. So that's kind of step one. That's how easy it is to hook up. The only trip up there is don't be confused when it says add it to the body tag. They do mean the before the closing tag. So let's see where I am in my presentation here. So Webflow project, as I mentioned before, what you're going to do is what I've done is just created a couple simple pages here for like sign up and sign in. So I've got a really simple little site here. But I've got my sign in where I just added a form to the page, and I'll go over a quick little bug that I ran into. But We've got sign in, we've got sign up, where I've got my name, email, and password. And then I haven't done it here, but you probably have like a forgot password or some other, you have a page where people can reset their password. But notice how they are all static pages. I've got nothing real fancy going on. The thing with Wizzed and Webflow is you do all of your design, all of your layout, all of your design, all of your styling. You do everything in Webflow. So that would be one of my big tips or kind of takeaways is style up your site first. Build your site, build the page like you want, get your dashboard pages and your detail pages and your login pages, get everything built like you want. Then also, as we'll go over in a second here, go build out your database, go build out your Airtable, go build out the thing where you're going to be storing all of your data, build that out as well. So get that structure and that shell built out as well, because once you have those two pieces, then it's going to be a lot easier. Once you bring them both together in Wizzed, it'll be easier to just kind of set up your connections and your resources and map everything. As opposed to what I kind of did is like, I want to get started right away. And I didn't have anything. I was like, I'm going to log into Wizzed. It was like, okay, well, now I need a sign up page. So I was going back to Webflow, and then it was like, okay, but now I need a users table. So now I'm going to Airtable. It's just easier if you set up the two pieces first and then go to Wizzed. I've got my static pages. You'll need to publish your site in order for everything to show up in Wizzed. So make sure you do that as well. So basically, you're going to create static pages for what you need, and then you are going to publish your project. Then let's dive into the Wized interface. The other thing I said that's not on the slide here is go and create your table in Airtable. So the one thing we'll kind of, before I get too much further, the videos in Wizzed, while there aren't a lot, they actually do he's pretty succinct. He does a pretty good job of like walking you through all the steps to hook things up. So I would actually recommend, if you're like ready to take the dive on this, definitely watch one or three of those videos. He'll walk you through authentication. He'll walk you through hooking things up. So I'm not necessarily going to hook a bunch of stuff up here. I'm going to give you more of an overview. And then once you're ready to dive in, the videos are a good place to look, because he'll show you all of the nuance. I'm just going to kind of give you an introduction, lay of the land. So when you dive into your Wized interface, what you're going to see is it's loading in my Webflow website. Up at the top, just like in Webflow, if I click on pages, you'll see I've got all of the pages of my site. Now, the difference here is it's showing me all of my collection pages as well. So you can see tutorial, custom calculator, tutorial, custom documentation, blah, blah. I've got all of my pages, and that's because it's pulling in my CMS. If you were setting this up properly, like we talked about earlier, you probably wouldn't have these CMS pages. You probably would have, you wouldn't have all those because you're building a web app and you'd be using static pages. So it looks like I've got a ton here, and that's only because I'm using CMS. But what you're going to need to do is navigate from your pages. You can navigate to any of the other pages. And now I've got pulled up my sign in page. Working down the left as well. This is kind of our page, like our site setup area. So this is where we can set up those resources. Remember how I talked about pulling in data, and that's what we would call a resource. So I've got an Airtable resource, and to set up a resource and pull in data, I could set up Airtable 2. Let's say I have another Airtable base that I want to pull in, Airtable 2. I can pull in Airtable or REST API or Stripe. So I pull in Airtable. I go and grab from my Airtable account. I grab my API key. I put it right in there. And then what's going to happen is I'm going to be able to test my connection. And all I have here is a user table. So go grab your API key. And now what I have actually, and with authenticate, I'll get into authentication in a minute, but I've got my resources. Requests are any sort of like, oh, I want to go and fetch, I want to fetch a row. I want to fetch a group of rows. I want to post, post or update something in Airtable. So those are my requests. Then the data that I pull through, what's cool about Wized is once you've set up your resources and your requests, you can run those and you can see what data is coming in. And what you actually end up doing is just dragging data, and that's how you map it. You'd like select you'd select an element, and then you'd be like, you would drag that data out over to the right side of the screen. So the right side of the screen is more of your data mapping. It's the element level stuff where you're setting the on click, you're setting classes, any parameters, you're setting the text. This is all the element level stuff. This is the project level stuff. So this is where I can see my data that's coming in. You can also see your page tree. I don't know how helpful this is to me. I mean, I guess I haven't built a full app, but you can't really change the order of things. You can't edit the styles. You can't edit the classes. All of that happens in Webflow. The only thing you can do with classes is like on click, you could add a class, or you could remove a class, or you can do that kind of stuff, but you can't permanently change anything about these elements. The little human is the authentication panel where you can set up limiting access to certain pages. You can set up your authentication. Pages is obviously all of our pages, and then we've got our settings for our site. Primarily, this is our login stuff. So that is a quick overview. The only other thing maybe that's worth pointing out is we also have a publish in the top right. So once you've made changes, you will need to publish your site again in order to view that live. But you can also preview your site. What's also nice is that if you do set up authentication, you can click this view as, and then you can choose which user you want to view the site as. So it gives you some flexibility so that you can kind of mimic what it's like to view your site as a certain user once you've set up authentication. Lastly, this URL parameter, because we're using static pages, you will need to be using URL parameters to filter or to get certain data for detail pages or actually index pages as well. So when a user logs in, we go to dashboard, and then it'll say, we set up URL parameters, and Jonas of Wizzed has good videos on that. But you set up URL parameters to say dashboard / user equals, and then the user ID or something, right? And so now it knows who the user is. So you're using URL parameters to effectively create the same effect as CMS pages. If that's kind of unclear, but anyway, that is the Wized interface. Like I said, you can't manipulate the design of the layout. That all happens in Webflow. So let's quick go to Wized for authentication. I pointed this out a little bit, but just to kind of give you a quick idea, I'm on my sign-in page. This is my site setup. They give you a lot of pre-built features for authentication. So once I have my Airtable set up that has my user table, and I create my resource, which is my Airtable, it's my users table in Airtable. So I've created that resource. Then I come down here, and in my site settings, I've said enable login is yes. And then the resource is going to be Airtable. It's the only resource I have in this project right now. The base is going to be no code collab user. These are all my other Airtable bases. So it's going to be no code collab users. Now it's going to check the table. It's my users table. And now it wants to know, because every user in order to log in has to have an email. And so the email field is email. So now what I've done is I've effectively set up my user table and linked it with Wizzed. But what I need to do now is I need to actually say, and let me actually redo this. So you're going to come to this page. This is my sign in page. I say login is on this page. Yes. So then what I do, I want to have an email password login. They've got another one called magic link, where they like email you a link. But in this case, email password login is yes. And now what I need to do is I need to say, which is the email field. And it's the UI isn't totally clear. Let me see if I can zoom in here for all of you. What you're going to do is you're going to click on selector. And now it says it's selector on. And now what I do is I go and I click on my email field and watch over here, because this is going to update. So when I click on email field, so now what I've done is I've linked this email field to the email as the email authentication. My password field, I'm going to link that to my password. And so you saw that updated. So now I've linked my email, I've linked my password, and my login button, I'm going to click on login. So now my form is all set up. One thing to just pause right here, I was having actually like a bug from Webflow when I would try to submit my password using this form. What was happening is Webflow was throwing an error saying you cannot submit passwords. Never seen this happen before to me. I guess I'm not submitting a lot of passwords, but you can't, it said you can't submit passwords, and it's a Webflow security thing. So what you actually need to do if you run into that situation, I talked to Jonas from Wizzed about this. If you run into that situation, and the Firebase people, if you're trying to set this up with Firebase, you might run into this because I saw it in some forums. What you do is you actually delete the submit button on the form. So you come into Webflow and I actually delete this submit button and I re-add in another button that's not the submit button. It's just a standard button. I re-add that in. And because it's not a submit button and it's not linked to this form, Webflow doesn't recognize that, oh, you're trying to submit a password. It just thinks I'm clicking a button. And then what you do is once, let's pretend here, this is my button that I've re-added. Over here on click, then I'm performing, I have to like hook up the on-click event from the button to be my authentication. So that is how that works. I got stuck, and then I talked to Jonas yesterday and I didn't have a chance to hook this up. So I know that that's the process, but if you're running into that same can't submit password, that's what you need to do. Delete the submit, add a new button. Then when we come down here, we're not setting up magic link, redirect on login. Yes, I want to redirect to, and then you get to choose whatever page. After they've logged in, what do you want to have them redirect to? Probably your dashboard or something. I created this thing called private page. If this were my sign up page, then I would not do the login. I would do create new user. And this would then sync with my Airtable, and you would do the same things where you are, where you are hooking up all the fields and you're sending data. So they've kind of made it, they've added all of this stuff inside of Wizzed to make the login process creation pretty simple. Jonas is really concise with it. So if you're setting it up, I would recommend following along step by step with that. I'm getting a little long-winded, so I will keep moving. Wiz for apps. The only thing I want to kind of point out here is that now, once you have created your authentication and you're on your dashboard screen, really what you're going to do is, let's see, you're going to go to a page. I don't have any, let's call it a private page. Okay, so here's the private page that I created. What you're going to end up doing is you're going to have, you have your resource, So I've got my Airtable resource. It doesn't have any data in it right now, but you might need to, you will create a request. And that request is where you can say, I want to grab all of the items in this list, or I want to get all of this stuff. So now what I'm doing is I'm going to Airtable and I'm setting up a request, or I'm setting up a request with Airtable to pull data in to my, pull data into my data field. And then what you end up doing is once you've set up the request and you're pulling data in, then what you do is you click on an element and your data comes in, and you're literally just going to drag the data over to the right. So think of this as like a little chunk of data, and you're going to pull it out. You're going to say, oh, I want this H2. I want the text of this H2 to be the title of whatever data is. You're going to grab it and you're just going to pull that data and map it to the text over on the right. This is where you're setting up your elements. So then if you want to set up on clicks, or if you want to do any sort of styling, if someone clicks something, then I want to start, you do that all at the element level on the right. And like I said earlier, because a lot of apps have like 2-3 pages, you're really just needing to set up a couple pages. The last thing I will say before moving on is that sometimes when you go to Airtable and you get data back, you get an array of data. So you get a list, you get an object, you get a bunch of data. And same idea, you're going to grab the array, and instead of putting it in the text, you're going to say, you're going to grab an element, right? So you'll grab, if you've got like your Airbnb listing, right? And you want to show a list of Airbnb listings. You're going to grab that one item on your static page. You're going to grab the list of stuff and you'll bring that list over to here. And then it'll know, oh, we've got 15 things. And so then it'll make 15. Now, once you have those 15 things, now you have to say, okay, well, the title of that is this data field. And then you update, and now you're mapping all of the specific individual elements of those list items. You're pulling that data over to those elements. I hope that made sense. That's where we're at. I'm going to hand it over. I think this is where Rachel comes back in and we kind of close this thing out.
Yeah, well, I mean, I expect that we'll probably alternate between us anyway at this point, but just as a summary of things at this point, starts off just first point here, Wizzed is an advanced no-code tool. This was something that Kyle was saying, we got a high-tech crew with us today for the most part, which is really cool because it means that all of Kyle's explanations here, it's not falling on deaf ears. I feel like everyone's probably rooted around and like understands this extremely well. But it's not like an entry level, no big deal tool for someone to jump in and just get going with straight away necessarily, especially if they don't have like a relative amount of expertise in Webflow as well, because as Kyle was saying, like you need to optimize this by having your website up and running, by having your database up and running, and the things that Wizzed actually allows you to do are relatively high level. I mean, like you can really make some magic happen on a large scale using Wizzed compared to what you're capable of achieving without it. And well, prides itself in its capacity to accommodate API integrations. Very, very much true. That was the main reason I'll move through these actually before I go off on a tangent. Simple membership sites, MemberStack probably better and simple to implement. We kind of covered that. Build out other bits first and then hook up with Wizzed. Covered that too. Data aggregation needs to happen with the data and not in Wizzed. Can you expand upon that, Kyle?
Yeah. So as I was thinking about it, I was like, okay, so let's say I have like let's say I have a tool where I've got I'm going to do Airbnb for motorcycles or something. I'm making this up. But if I want to know, like, let's say on my page, I want to be like, there are 75 motorcycles for you to choose from. Well, Wizzed isn't a tool that you can like bring in a bunch of stuff and then like you can take all the data, aggregate it in there, run a calculation on it, average it out, you're not doing that in Wizzed. Wizzed is basically grabbing data and mapping data. So if you want to do any sort of like calculations on your data, if you want to run any like aggregate, you wanted sums, averages, anything like that, you've got to you need to do that with the data. And then you pull that in, and then Wizzed can show you set up a new resource or you set up a new request. Wizzed pulls that in, and now you've got your average for how much your average motorcycle cost is, right? So Wizzed isn't the tool where it's going to like pull in and now I've got this like sandbox where I can just manipulate and do whatever I want. If you are wanting to get even more technical, they do have like an API where you can start to do more of that stuff. But I think that was something in my head where I was like, okay, so what if I want to like show the totals of something? You need to do that in Airtable.
New version equals coming soon, specifically as well with regard to what might be considered the cons of using Wized right now. Like, it's a very new platform and there are problems that people are running into, and customer service is relatively thin on the ground. I mean, Kyle was saying that basically you have to go into the Discord, but there's something a little bit unofficial and low-key about it at this moment in time. Apparently there's a new version coming out in the next 2 to 3 weeks, like a serious Wiz 2.0 kind of business. So it could be that there is like a real improvement that's just around the corner. And we should all look out for that and enjoy it when it comes around and download and play around. But
in talking to Jonas, he said that they were hoping to launch at the end of March. He said, we're not going to hit that, and we wanted to do it on our own time, but he thinks it'll be in the next few weeks. And he said that while this is a pro level tool right now, and you've really got to be comfortable getting your hands dirty, the updated interface and the updated version will hopefully bring down the complexity of it so that it'll be more approachable for more people.
And then the final thing, pricing. Last thing, just in case anyone hadn't managed to get around to that, and we're just about hopping into Wized, like we were looking at things. It looks like they have a little bit of a strange pricing system, because like they have basically like a low end price where you would pay 20 to 30 euros per month. And then there's not really a whole lot of in between before it goes right up to like 100 plus. And that scalability is, or that scaling, I should say, is directly related to the number of subscribers. I believe that's the case, right?
It's
like
it's related to the number of hits of visitors per month.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So it's
MemberStack, and those have to do with subscribers. Wizzed is visitors per month. I think with it's 19 euros a month, and you get 10,000 visitors, and then it goes from 19 to 100 euros a month, and then you get 2 million visitors. So there's kind of a no man's land in there.
Yeah, they debated on having a middle step, and then they were like, nah, they believe in us to either go hard or go home. That's the takeaway.
The one other thing that he did say about the new version, he's like, we've got way more support material, more clonables, more documentation, more videos. So with the rollout of the new thing, I think they were kind of like, let's just stop creating stuff for the old version when we know the new one's coming soon. And so let's do it all for the new one. So that I think we'll get better support there.
And just like one very last insight that I'm going to throw in here off the cuff is that I was surprised to find that it was so bespoke to Webflow, so tailored to Webflow. This was at like Wiz was built for Webflow. So like I didn't ask too many questions at the open house last week when I was at the Wiz breakout, but I did say to him like, so how would you do, what would you say is the problem you felt you were solving by creating Wiz? Like, what is it you were running into that made you feel that this was something that needed to exist? And he said, we love Webflow. We build everything in Webflow. And we were creating these websites, we were creating these apps and so on and so forth. And we were integrating these things externally. And what we found was super annoying was the fact that in order to integrate these things externally and have the functionality that we wanted, we had to host it away from Webflow. And they wanted to host it in Webflow, and they wanted to publish it live in Webflow because they think that that's a really, really convenient and powerful feature of the Webflow platform in general. So they built this in order to be able to keep their design and their hosting and publication in Webflow whilst also integrating these capabilities. And I kind of think I think it's really cool that because a lot of the time there's not a whole lot that's being built for Webflow specifically, like I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle, that MemberStack probably caters to multiple platforms. So I think it's cool that this one is like just like really on point with like, no, this is a Webflow application. And you can see it in the interface, right? You can, when you were looking through, it's like, it just looks like a Webflow interface. They've taken that styling and replicated it. So that's just my last key consideration to throw into the mix there is that this is like not a player that's looking to like hit a whole bunch of different places. Like this is like a Webflow player that knows exactly what it wants to do and why it wants to do it.
Questions, comments, concerns? The one thing I will say, we had several months ago, we did a bubble. We had a bubble presentation.
Mm.
And I don't know if anyone else on the chat here has used Bubble, but let's stop sharing my screen. I walked away from that. I'd never used Bubble. I was watching it. I walked away from it going, I hope I never have to use Bubble. This thing looks like it sucks. Sorry if anyone from Bubble's watching this video on YouTube after the fact. Sorry if the two people that watch our videos after the fact, one of them happens to be Bubble. I walked away from it like, this seems no. And I will say, I did not have any of that in Wized. I was like, I feel like I still have a lot to learn, but it doesn't leave me going, I hope I'd never have to use this. It had me thinking, I wish I had a good idea that would make me want to really dig into this.
So how did you toss filters on top? I guess that's the part I'm a little confused about. Like you have your data set or whatever, and currently I'm using like attributes or whatnot to filter because I do niche directories and stuff like that. And I'm currently looking at bringing Firebase in to do a login stuff, but that's the part I didn't understand when you were talking about like.
That is a great question. And I believe when you pull in your list and then you have, you show, like I showed you have the list.
Yeah.
I believe once you have the list in there, you can't really, the one thing that was weird about their interface, or one of the things that was weird about their interface is like, every once in a while you like click on something and it's like, oh, I've triggered the data menu to come up. And in the top right corner, there's this thing that comes up that is all about the data that you have linked or something. And I believe there's filters in there. So I think there's two ways to answer your question. One is you can filter a list based on certain criteria from actually I believe any of the Airtable filtering and sorting and things can be applied to the list that's brought in. So that's, I think when you have your list, I apologize that I'm not answering your question well. When you bring in the list, just like you can in Airtable where you can filter, sort, maybe group, you can do that same thing to that list when it's brought in from Airtable.
Okay, so I guess that's how Softer's probably doing it as well, because that's kind of how I was working with. There's one that I'm about to do I have to do in Softer because I didn't know about Wized and whatnot, and I've already set it up for that. But it sounds, if you can do that same kind of, I think Softer uses the same kind of filtering. I like the idea of like being able to create what I want to create and have it in Webflow.
Yeah.
And that's where Wiz is really appealing, because Softer, you don't have the, I mean, you're very limited in what your final look is going to look like, but it's very easy to use. So that's why I understood the mapping bits and whatnot like that. Yeah, no, it looks like a very cool tool though.
The other way that you can filter is what I was talking about, those URL parameters, where like when someone logs in, you're effectively going to have their user ID, right? And so then what you do is when you go and you get all of your tasks, or you get all of your motorcycles, right? You can say, show me only the motorcycles that are associated with this ID. And then that would filter down your list as well. And then that would be a URL parameter that you would add in, especially if you were going from like index page to detail page. You would throw in the URL parameter. He's got some videos on it. You know how when you're in a car and you are in the passenger seat and you've driven somewhere 10 times, and then someone's like, hey, jump in the driver's seat. And you're like, I have no idea how to get there. And it takes driving there to know how to get there. I've watched a lot of his videos, and when he does it, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I know you can do that. I know you can filter. I've watched him do that. And in my memory, my recollection, it's, you do it the same way that you do it with Airtable. When the resource comes in, the request comes in on that list, you're doing it, or you're also doing it with URL parameters. That said, I haven't driven there. So you might get in and start driving there and realize Kyle was full of crap.
On your Bubble note, I was really impressed. I mean, with Bubble, when I maybe a year ago, I delved into it again. It was all stemming from this idea of needing login, and I like the back end of Bubble. I mean, the full database is a good thing, but yeah, no, it's a convoluted kind of. They made up their own language, which doesn't like, even the way that they explain how to do something. They made up their own language and way of doing it that wasn't even code based, I would say. So it was I found it very confusing. So
the really nice thing about Wizzed, and he said this to me too when I was talking to him, he said, if you just want a simple login, you want to gate some pages so that you want to have paid content, whatever, and you don't care about how things necessarily look. MemberStack, outside of, there's a lot, MemberSpace, like there's tools that you can use, and those are fine. Those are easy. Those are probably a really nice way to go. If you are very particular that you want to design your login, you want to design your app, you want to design things to your specific guidelines, then we're the only way that you can do that. And that's because
Wized is going to be,
sorry.
Wized is going to be more secure though, because it's dealing with a separate database versus the CMS. Like that's one of the reasons that I went with Softer, was because I need to have very secure. I don't want anybody who's not logged in to be able to access the data. And if it's in an Airtable that's secure, then it's never going to be in the front end. Unlike MemberStack, which just hides, the stuff. So
yeah, tell me, because it seems like you know this. So MemberStack, they say, okay, so we've got this thing, we're just hiding your pages with JavaScript. And if someone turns off JavaScript, they could get around us and they could still see your pages.
They don't even need to turn it off. They can just edit the HTML.
And with Wizzed, they can't. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, if it's coming from if the permissions are coming to give you access to Airtable, then they can't access your Airtable information without without login.
But if I have a static page, so I actually realized I didn't say that. So once you've set up your login, your
Mhm.
authentication, then on the pages, you can go through and you can hit a page, you can choose your page. And then on the left side, there's a way for you to say, require login to view this page, and you hit yes.
Mhm.
So if I have a static page that is fully built in Webflow and all of the content was from Webflow,
Mhm.
someone could turn off JavaScript or edit the HTML and see what's on that page. But if,
Yeah.
is that correct?
Yeah, there should be a way to do that. Like that was the thing with MemberStack or any of them, Outseta or any of them, because it's not a external data source. The only secure things is the stuff that if you like created parameters or fields in MemberStack that you had secured there on there separate, then it would be secure. But otherwise, yeah.
So if you had you've got a list of employees and it's got their pictures and their emails and their phone numbers and their dates of birth and all that stuff. And if you're storing that in the Webflow CMS and it's only hidden behind MemberStack, people could get access. But if it's in Airtable, even if they get access, the page hasn't gone and retrieved that data. And so therefore, even if they view the page, it'll just be blank.
That's right.
Yeah.
I never thought of that.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good point. They also do the thing where it's like, wasn't there something where they're like, we'll black out your page, or they'll they had some blackout hack too, right?
Yeah, I was talking to go ahead, Penny.
No, I seem to recall seeing something about them trying to sort of get around that problem of being able to see that data somehow, but I don't know exactly how they were doing it.
That's part of 2.0, which we're all still waiting for.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
Because Outseta does the same thing where they keep all your data is on a separate database. So that's how they can keep their security up.
If you put it in the separate database, if you put the stuff in the Webflow CMS, then no. That because when I asked Outseta the same thing, and their response was, yes, anything that's in our database would be the same as like it in MemberStack's database. Those kind of things are completely not available because they're server side. But the second that you come into Webflow and you're accessing everything through the front end, there's no way to gate that without, not being server side. It's just browser, and there's no way to actually protect it. I was speaking to Alex from FinSuite, and he said there's a way that you can set something on top, I guess, of something. Even like what I was trying to do with Firebase with the Webflow CMS, almost needing another layer on top of it to give, I guess, Firebase the authorization to access past that point. I forget what he called it. I have to go back and look at it. But yeah,
could you put things in folders, password protect them, and have Firebase access those folders through a password?
Maybe.
Can I ask too, would you go as far as to say that you consider MemberStack or equivalent solutions to be insecure, or is it just that you think Wized or equivalent solutions are more secure than them?
First.
Yeah, I would say the MemberStack's it's not secure, and their argument and Outseta's, and because their responses have actually been, well, nobody really does that. that's nobody's really going to go after your stuff, and that's fair. I mean, in most cases, a lot of the data, I have a country everywhere directory for BIPOC, LGBTQ, and disabled artists, and all of the stuff is pretty much widely available what I have stored in the CMS. So I'm not super concerned about that kind of end of things, but there are certain things like you just wouldn't want people to have access to, like you said, a company directory or something like that. And yeah, the chances of somebody turning off the JavaScript or changing the HTML for, you know, mischief or for whatever reason is probably low, but it's still insecure.
But no site has ever been hacked ever, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are no bad actors out there.
But so
Right,
that's
but-
why it's cool with like Softer and Wized with this whole idea of your database is somewhere separate. And I imagine that when they come up with what Webflow come up with their login stuff, they must be securing it somehow. I would
That's
think.
the idea.
Mhm.
That's
So-
what
They
they
could.
promised. They've promised that it would be secure.
Well,
they-
but they'll have access to, I mean, they have the ability to create that interface, right? Whereas MemberStack is just kind of a little layer on top. You know, whereas ideally Webflow is going to be able to, you know, create that gateway between the data and what gets displayed on the page.
So
But-
do any of you see a situation where on a marketing site, a dynamic marketing site, you would use Wizzed for the data storage aspect of it instead of using Webflow CMS?
I can. I built a site using MemberStack for a dojo. They offer videos, instructional videos that are gated behind money and gated behind you have to have achieved a certain level of proficiency before you'd be allowed to see some of these videos, because they, I don't know, they deal with the use of weapons or you know, they have advanced techniques. And so I put them on MemberStack, and because it was really the best solution I could find at the time, being new to membership sites. And what has turned out to be the case is, one, the limitations of MemberStack not being able to occupy more than one group, not more than one subscription, as it were. Like if I'm a black belt, I can't also belong to the brown belts, the green belts, the blue belts, the yellow belts, the white belts. I can only belong to one group in MemberStack at a time. And I cannot be moved from one group to another group. And so they're running into problems now. They're saying, well, this person has now achieved a level. They've already paid their annual subscription for access to tools, but now they need access to the new tools. We need to just move them from green to brown. Can I do that? MemberStack doesn't, you can't do that. And so, you know, earlier I mentioned that I've run into key limitations with MemberStack that are promised as a part of 2.0, but I haven't seen them yet. So that's one thing. And then the security thing hasn't proven to be a problem for them, but knowing that this organization sells those videos and thinks of them as highly sensitive, the fact that I know that the MemberStack solution is not technically secure is kind of a problem. You know, I mean, I don't talk about it. I don't tell them that. I'm not hiding it from them, but also it just makes me uneasy. And so is Wizzed the solution for that? I don't know. I mean, it seems like all these no-code tools present the same question, which is, do they actually solve the problem better than code? And do they solve the problem easier than code? Because each of them have their own learning curve, their own languages, their own interface and everything else. And so whenever I'm working with my developer, I've got a full stack guy too. He's like, isn't the no-code stuff supposed to be easy? Why do you need my help right now? You know, so I run into that a lot. And so, you know, I get excited about new no-code tools, but this one looks difficult to learn, to be honest. And I don't know that it's actually going to solve the problem better. So that's my spiel.
That's an interesting take, because there's a learning curve with this. And the thing is, though, there's a learning curve with Webflow.
Yeah.
And
sure.
if I I've told people before, like, if you, like, people that I've known, they're like, hey, I want to build a website. I've heard Webflow is great. And
Yeah, no way.
I'll literally be like, yeah, I would go do Squarespace.
Yeah.
You know, like, unless you are committed to really learning this thing, I wouldn't tell someone to learn Webflow.
Right.
Now, the thing is, though, I also only use Webflow. Like, I could go into Squarespace. I know how to do Squarespace. I've done Squarespace. If I needed to hand code a site, I could, but now I pretty much am exclusively Webflow. And when it comes to these other tools, we're talking about like, oh, well, there's MemberStack and there's Outseta and there's Wizzed. Oh, but then you might be able to use, MemberSpace. But there's like all these other tools to solve there's like 7 different cats that you can.
And every one of those is 100 hours of learning how to use it.
Exactly. And so what I'm wondering and what I'm seeing, or maybe this is a question for the group. I don't have a lot of projects that could actually use Wizzed, to be honest, but is Wizzed a tool where you could throw your, you could hitch your horse to that wagon and you could be like, this is the one I'm going to use. And even though it's going to take me 40 hours to learn it and to get good at it, at least it works really nice with Webflow. And then I know I can do everything I need to do. And now I don't have to worry about all that other stuff.
That's right. That's a good question. Is it the Swiss Army knife of add-on tools to Webflow? And can it do everything? And I don't know.
Because if it is, then I'll spend the time.
Yeah.
Then I will go through the learning curve. I'll watch the videos. I'll do all the stuff. And when it comes to the next authentication that I need to build, even though MemberStack might be easy, you know what? I'm a Wizzed guy now.
Right.
Well, and the part of the problem is that unless you actually have a project to build, it's hard to devote that time to learning it on in a real way, as opposed to watching videos and trying some stuff, right? When you've actually got to, make something work the way the client needs it to work, that pressure helps you learn it an awful lot faster.
True. Show of hands, how many people have like side projects, or I suppose if it's your business, I guess that counts too, that you work on, that you're like, I'm going to build this app and do this thing, and like that you're working on things that are yours and your baby as opposed to someone else's baby. You guys have babies. And looking at, is this a tool where you're like, I could see myself wanting to switch and use this for my baby?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the cost effectiveness of not paying extra for the CMS that is not, that I can do. I'm duplicating everything in Airtable right now. Like, that's part of it. Like, there's so much of it. Like, I'm using Airtable as a backend and as really the source of truth. And I'm using different automations with Integromat and things like that to do a lot of the functionality and then pump it into the Airtable or into the Webflow CMS. So the idea of cutting it out doesn't bother me at all. I'm kind of, and I'm excited by the fact of being able to make the thing look like I want it to look, as opposed to, like, right now, I am about to do another project similar, but using software specifically because I couldn't find a way to make something secure that had to be. Like, there's going to be some information that for security reasons, that I do not want to have that. So I didn't even know about this at the time. Otherwise, and even my brain, I'm like, maybe I can switch this one over and try it for this, right? And even I, just spent whatever on Webflow hosting for upping it, because even with the other thing with Webflow is that with the CMS is you have 30 fields and then you jump up to 60 fields, and so like you start doing directory type stuff with you have way more fields, and with Airtable, you don't get those kind of
Ah.
restrictions.
Mhm.
And so, you know, all of this is starting to look a lot more cost effective and very much worth learning how to use it.
Yeah.
What is
And I
the
think
impact? Go ahead, Rachel.
I was going to say it definitely the Webflow CMS I feel it doesn't hit too much of a middle ground in my opinion. It's like it's great, but it also isn't great at the same time. It's like it can solve your problems and be wonderful and amazing, but specifically when you get into the higher numbers and you've got like, you know, I think probably like 50, 100 plus entries, it gets really difficult to manage really, really quickly. So I completely agree. I think that cutting it out and having a system for just being able to maintain the data once it gets past a certain number is a no-brainer. And I think Webflow has a long way to go before they get things internally organized to a point where the CMS can kind of sustain those systems.
Right. I mean, the only other thing though is that if it is something that you're giving to a client, now they have another tool they have to learn.
Well, that's the one thing that, talking about cost efficiency and just having the one tool. I mean, before Wiz came around, you were Webflow to Zapier to Airtable to Integromat back to Webflow. So you're paying for Zapier, you're paying for Airtable, you're paying for Integromat or Parabola. So now you're just paying for Airtable and Wizzed, and you're only having to learn those two tools instead of having four. And if for some reason your Webflow site gets backed up and you have to reconnect everything, you're just connecting those two tools instead of four tools that got disconnected because the Webflow ID changed on the back, you know.
Mhm. Yeah.
And actually,
Point.
can I just ask quickly? So like just thinking about the client handoff side of things, do people, if you had an Airtable base Webflow setup and Wizzed was what was connecting them or like creating that functionality, if you handed that over to a client, would there be any reason for them to go into Wizzed at all?
Oh, no, they wouldn't need to go into Wizzed, but they would need to use Airtable.
They would need to
Right.
update
So
the
if
Airtable?
as opposed to, you know, so if you're using, if you're not using the CMS in Webflow and everything is in Airtable, but you've still got to show them how to change things, and the editing, you know, one of those things about editing CMS items in Webflow is it's like, oh, I just want to go change that thing. I can do it from the front end and it's done. And now they've got another whole layer of complication that they have to deal with Airtable.
Especially
And-
too, because it's like, wait, is that data in Webflow or is that in Airtable? I'm not sure.
I have enough trouble with that with my CMS Made Simple sites where it's kind of like, is this a page or is it in a special little area that I've created? Like it's a similar kind of thing like collections. It's just, you know, and they're like, I don't know. Hi, can you change this for me?
Okay, so
And it's the simplest system I could find before Webflow.
does Wizzed and Airtable or whatever it is, I haven't thought through this, and does it actually get around our nested list issue with the Webflow CMS? You know, you can only have like certain number, you can have like one nested list. There's like some, you know what I mean? There's like some limitation with nested lists, and it's the whole reason that FinSuite built their nested lists
Right.
attribute, or as attribute, as Rachel might say.
Incorrectly.
Does that actually get around our, I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. But
If you're not using the CMS, then
yeah, so
because you're essentially mapping and doing all of that data within Airtable or within Wizzed, right? So
I think you could get
you're-
around the
you're
CMS
kind of
limit.
aggregating that there and then just porting it over to, right? So you've got to set up your layers, like you would set up your layout where you want that nested information in. And then so how do you get can you attach more than one base or one table? Maybe that's what it is, right? Maybe you're
Yeah.
pulling information from different tables.
And
Can you do that in Wized?
you can set up 10 different resources that all
You
get
can link
pulled in.
records and stuff in Airtable, and yeah.
Mhm. Right.
That's interesting. The one
That is
thing I'll
interesting.
also say as we're talking about, oh, this could be great. We'll only have to learn one, like we'll learn one tool, and then we just learn Webflow, Wized, and Airtable.
Mhm.
Jonas from Wizzed said that he's like, a lot of people, what they do is they will create an app or 2 or 3 using Airtable. And then they eventually get to the point where they go, all right, I'm going to level up and I'm going to use Xano. And I've never used Xano. I had heard about Xano for the first time the other day when Rachel mentioned it to me. Apparently it's like Airtable, but when you get a larger database, Xano is far faster. You don't have the lag that you have with Airtable. Xano is much more responsive, and it allows you to have a much snappier app. So,
He said too, like the thing that would make you move from Airtable to Xano is also there is like the Webflow CMS 10,000 entries, I believe, is the maximum. And then it's 50,000 records for Airtable. But if you reach a point where you're actually exceeding the 50,000, then you are forced to move into a different database. And at that point, you would use Xano, like purely for scalability reasons. But then he was pretty convinced in his assertions that Xano was a better tool. But again, it was one of those things where it had a higher barrier to entry. It's a harder no-code tool to work with.
But can you connect, and can you use Wiz to connect to Xano?
He said that
Okay.
they use Xano for most of their products.
I think instead of, when I set up that resource and there was like
Mhm.
Airtable, Stripe, REST API, I think what Xano does is you set up your base, right? You set up your base, and then I think in like a click or two, it sets up a REST API for you.
Right.
You maybe using your column names, and so it sets up a REST API, and then that's how you connect your Xano base as a resource in Wized.
Right.
I didn't
Yeah,
know
I
if it's
mean,
called a base.
it looks pretty cool.
Xano, definitely you need to have more technical skills.
Right.
Is it-
Definitely.
Uh,
So Xano is something that I'm doing some things with. So there is definitely a learning curve of going from Airtable to Xano, but it is, with that learning curve, it's so much more powerful. And kind of going back to the comments a couple of moments ago about Webflow with the nested collections list, one of the reasons that I'm using Xano is because I need to have many-to-many relationships, and it is just not possible with the Webflow CMS. And it's also kind of a mess trying to do it within Airtable.
Oh, can you give me an example of what's like a simple use case that you're talking where like I need many and it's not working? And
Well, let's just think about like Amazon for a moment. You want to get a pair of no, maybe that's not a great example. Let me just talk this through. So you've got, let's say we want to buy a pair of shoes. Those shoes can be men's, women's, adult, children, baby, what color, what size. I mean, there's just starts to get to be so many attributes.
yeah, and setting that, I can see the limitation there in Webflow for sure.
Mhm.
And then I suppose in Airtable, that gets complicated in Airtable as well, is from how you were setting it up.
That, I mean, there's stuff that you can do, but part of what I then started to find is then trying to get all that into Webflow, and getting was just such a
Yeah.
So what are you doing? So you're in Xano, is it easier now to bring it into Webflow because you're in Xano?
So I am similar to what's been said a lot this evening about, not using the Webflow CMS. I'm not using the Webflow CMS. So it's all direct calls and pulling the data from Xano.
Do you feel like you've just like, is this your first time ever building a big site that doesn't use the Webflow CMS?
Yeah.
Do you feel a little naked? Like you're like, wait, what am I like? I feel like the first time I do it, I'm going to be like, where's my CMS?
Why can't I just go over here?
Yeah, I just showed up to school without my clothes on. And I have to take a test.
Go
Like,
over
what's
to
going on?
collections.
Not as much as maybe one would think, because I think Xano's really cool.
Okay. And
Is
how
that
are you
the site
pulling,
you're
how are
building?
you pulling it in?
So there's JavaScript calls on the pages, and then the items on the page are tagged. So I don't know if you're interested in Xano. They do have something coming up with I think it's No Code Founders in April, just kind of talking about the product and such. I guess part of what I'm doing doesn't exactly follow some of their examples that are out there, because they were showing, what they've been showing is, hey, here's this, you basically kind of take the HTML and stuff on your page and you stick in kind of all these attributes and calls. And that was just really kind of a pain in the butt, because one of the powers of Webflow is, you can move things around and such. And so I really wanted to have a lot of flexibility. So I'm kind of doing some stuff in a slightly atypical way from some of the stuff that's out there, but I also think probably makes a lot of sense for rapid prototyping.
Yeah.
And is this a site that you will maintain, or is it something you're handing off to a client?
It's something that I plan to maintain.
Okay, so
that
that learning curve of now they have to learn Xano is not an issue for this particular thing.
I used to work with WordPress, so I know a little PHP and whatnot. Now that WordPress has a headless CMS, and I haven't seen anybody actually do this yet, but I've heard people discussing doing it, but having Webflow as your front end and using WordPress CMS on Netlify is a really low cost opportunity to have a really almost unlimited database for low budget projects of hosting on Netlify. And you'd have to use React or Vue to connect everything together. Or I've heard somebody say that they were going to try to use the Udesly plugin to WordPress and then export the code and host it on Netlify, but I haven't actually seen anybody do it yet.
But then you're still dealing with the client is still dealing with the WordPress backend.
Yeah, but a lot more people are familiar with that.
Can I?
Using it as a headless CMS, I guess you're only dealing with the database. You're not working with WordPress's front end. You're not working with Gutenberg blocks. You're not working with themes.
Oh, I know.
You're only using it like an Airtable type database, and the way it scales, it's virtually unlimited. But you have to have a bunch of scripts to be able to clean things out or use plugins if you're using the WordPress platform to clean things out. Because one thing, I didn't realize this for years, but when you delete something from WordPress, you don't really delete something from WordPress. You have to use something to go in and actually manually delete it so that it's actually gone. It's sort of like making a post on Twitter, and then 10 years later, someone pulls it up and says, "Hey, you said this."
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's one of the things that I really dislike about the way the WordPress does things. It's just that it's just, okay, I'm going to update this post. I'm going to update this post. You're basically creating it again and adding it to the database, and it's. Ugh.
Can I ask a question that I should know the answer to, but I've just never stopped and looked? Is headless CMS? It's just basically a database that doesn't have a front end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Bolt.
Yeah, there's
And you bolt it on to whatever front end you want.
Xano, like we're talking about here, right? that's what we're saying about with Xano is.
Or
Yeah, there's
Airtable.
Contentful.
Or
There's
Airtable.
other alternatives. There's Contentful. There's I used to know a lot more that were out there.
Does it seem a little like what you just described of, okay, so we're going to go with the WordPress and then we're going to go Netlify or whatever it was. And then we're going to take Vue.js and then we're going to bring that in using Umbraco. And then we're going to take Cold Fusion and probably, and then we're finally going to end up in Webflow. Some of that just seemed like, all right, is the point here to like have as many steps as we can? And
Yeah. How many different tools can we use?
Well, I will say, I mean, I spent about, I guess they had the free trial with software or whatever before I had to like commit to it or whatnot. And I'm impressed with it for what it can do. And they keep improving it. And it's one-to-one to like, it's built to connect to Airtable seamlessly. It is actually a really, as far as like, I'm using it with the next client because also for their, they have to understand Airtable a little bit, but then they don't have to touch anything. Then they just have to worry about their Airtable base.
Yeah. But the other nice thing about software is that you can actually update your Airtable base from within software.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I had a friend, he came one time a couple months ago, and he had this idea of something he wanted to do. And so I just saw this thing on probably Product Hunt that was softer. And I was like, this seems like something that you're trying to do. Give it a shot. I'm telling you, the next morning he had it up and running. It was,
it's that easy.
Yeah. Do you have much control over the UI? Or can you tell this is a software app?
Yeah, I usually can. It depends on what template you use, right? Sort of which of the choices you set up with as to how obvious it is, because there's only so many sort of visual options. But I think that's getting better and better all the time. It's been a while.
And you can adjust things with actually custom CMS or CSS, I think. But I haven't even looked into that. I know that there's a possibility of doing some of that with it. I mean, it's not Webflow. I mean, so that's why Wizzed is kind of exciting for that kind of aspect. And I'm really really interested in checking it out and trying it to see how it would work, because I mean, comparatively cost-wise, it's actually probably pretty similar once you start putting the things together. And like we're talking about, I want kind of as few tools as possible. Like, I mean, if you want the custom look that you get from Webflow, you need something in between. Because, and if Rachael, you're correct, and their logic and membership is not going to be quite up to snuff probably for a while, then I'm not going to be holding out hope that it's going to be the solution right away. So, I mean, in future it could be, but that's not where we're at.
So here's my issue that I have not yet seen any of these systems let me do, and that's only because I haven't really spent a lot of time digging into them. I have a site that is built in CMS Made Simple, and there's the ability for it's an artist website, so the artists themselves can log into the back end of the website. They can update the information that they have in there about themselves and their bio, etc. And they can change the images that they've uploaded. And then the public just looks at their page and sees the information that they've put in there. So the public themselves are not members. They're just viewing the information that the members have put in. So it's a little different than a sort of a typical membership site where you log in and you have access to things and all that's gated. And I haven't yet found a no-code tool that would let me let the members do that kind of updating themselves. And
I
maybe
think you
that's
could do
just
that
because I
with
haven't
Wized.
looked.
I think you could do
Softer
that.
again.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could use Softer and use a, I think hook it up. I think probably they use the Airtable form. Somehow they hook it up in Softer to do that, because if you look at one of their template ones, it's for like Airbnb type stuff, and then the hosts can upload their own
Okay.
thing. So it'll be the same kind of concept as that.
Okay. I'll
So
check into that.
So if you were to use Wized, you'd create a login for your members, and once they're in, they would see the Airtable, their Airtable record. Okay.
Yeah.
And then through Wized, they could update that Airtable record. They could,
Okay.
you could probably add new pictures. You might be able to delete pictures, change their name, all that stuff, which then when they log in and they see their dashboard with all their stuff, and now they can edit that dashboard page, which updates Airtable.
Okay.
Then on the public images, not the logged in experience, what you're doing is you're pulling through all of the images from that Airtable. And
Right.
then I don't know what the rest of the site's set up like, but if like maybe the artist name is next to it or something, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
But I think
Yeah.
that would work with Wized.
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
sounds like it would.
Yeah. All right. I hadn't gone digging far enough yet, so I was sort of waiting to see what Webflow was going to come up with, which I don't think Webflow was going to be able to do that anyway.
Because
don't
I had run into a similar situation where I was like, at my company, the insurance company,
Mhm.
we've got 180 going on 200 employees, and we just updated our website.
Mhm.
And I was like, if people want to update their profile, their bio page, like I don't want to be the one managing that. Now, luckily we updated it. There were like 10 people who want updates, and so I just did it. But I was thinking, if there's 100 people who want to change their profile, that's going to be, I need to give people their own ability. So I was thinking through all that, and I was having those same, like, how do I do that? Like, am I creating a login experience for them? But now like Wized, because Wized will pull in data, but you can also update data the other way.
Right.
You can push. I think that
Right.
would now, obviously you're not using the Webflow CMS. You've got a
Right.
or
Right.
or CMS made simple for that matter.
Yeah. Yep.
Do you actively try to pull everyone off of CMS made simple when you have the chance?
When I get an opportunity now, and I mean, I've got a few clients that are still on it right now. I'm in the middle of trying to work with this guy who's setting up a Wi-Fi system for a campground, and we built the website for the campground years ago.
Yeah.
And so we're now he's doing login through this captive portal thing. And I have to kind of set up pages where I pull information, is where I'm doing a lot of work with URL parameters right now. And because he sends me all these URLs, and I have to like pull the data out of it that says, okay, from the purchase thing, now here we have a voucher number. So here's your voucher number, and here's how much data you have left. And here's like oh, and I'm like back in, hand coding again with this thing.
Yeah.
It's like making me nuts also, because the guy's just kind of like, here's a URL. And it's like, what do you want me to do with this? I don't know what data to show for what. And it all has to happen on a single page. And it's like, so it's all conditional logic and stuff. It's making me nuts.
Speaking of annoying clients, I had a client referred to me through Rachael, who was Yeah, he has this website where they sell toupees, and I think that Rachel sent them over to me, subtly hinting that I needed a toupee. And because she's like, "Oh yeah, you should talk to Kyle. He's in your target market." So I was updating his site. We got it all. He was kind of neurotic. It was crazy. But anyway, there's this one spot on his site where it says, like, if you don't want to fill in the form electronically, you can download our PDF form here. And there was a link to a PDF that was a Google, it was like hosted on Drive. But when you click on it, up opens the thing that says, like, you don't have permission. Like, you don't have permission to view this file. So I send him, like, he's like, I had a client who tried to download our PDF form, and he said I needed to turn it into a JPEG. So I'd like to turn this form into a JPEG. So I was like, I looked at it and I was like, no, and so I realized, well, if I explain that you need to go update the permissions, the file, he's not going to understand that. So I just said, I totally get it. Just send me the form and I'll take care of it. He sends me back. He opens up the form in Google Drive on his computer, and he takes a screen grab of the whole screen. And then he sends me the screen grab of the form.
Oh, no.
And he's like, all right, here it is. I'm like, yeah, and he goes, here it is. Turn this into a JPEG. We never ended up updating the form.
Wow.
It's pretty good.
But do you know how to toupee? What's the point?
I said, can you just pay me in toupees?
I figured as much.
How many
Toupees are
toupees do you
expensive, man.
need?
For the little bit of work I did on his site, I would have had about a quarter of a toupee.
Well, I can take a screenshot of Kyle and just kind of draw. It'd be about the same as the form.
You mean like a JPEG?
Right? Can you turn it into a JPEG? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, with that, this has been a great night. I always appreciate the conversation. A very elevated conversation tonight. This was fantastic. I also love seeing when every once in a while, when I have the opportunity to dip into other live streams and events and stuff, it's always fun seeing the familiar faces. So thank you for coming to this one. I hope you got something out of it. I hope it wasn't a total refresher of stuff you already knew. I hope it gave you a little insight and gave you a little more confidence to go into Wizzed.
Excellent.
But yeah, thank you so much for coming. You guys probably have lives and other things that you'd like to get back to. So we can probably call it at 9:30. And with that, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure.
Excellent.
All right.
Thanks for organizing.
I will say, No Code North, our event is on YouTube
yeah.
on Friday at noon Eastern. If you're interested, it's going to be Connor Finlayson talking about Unicorn Factory and No Code Meets No Code, a conversation, not a demo, but I'm sure there'll be a little bit of technical stuff in there too.
Love it.
At noon Central Time.
Noon
Eastern.
Eastern. Did I say Central? Noon
No,
Eastern.
Okay.
But if you go to nocodenorth.webflow.io, you can sign up for our mailing list, and there will be one more email going out this week. So
Yeah, I'm on that list. I actually, just as a quick note, kudos to that beautiful website. I think it looks great.
Maggie
Yeah,
did an
great.
awesome job.
Maggie did
Yeah.
fabulously.
Yeah. I wouldn't have thought I'd be so taken with such a heavy orange use, but I am. I really am.
Good. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yep. Excellent. Good stuff.
Love
All
it.
right.
Have a great night.
Thanks,
Take it
everyone.
easy.
Have a great night.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Nice to see you, Spencer. Oh, he's already gone. Yeah.
What is the no code?
No Code North.
What is the URL for No Code North?
It might just be nocodenorth.io, is it not?
No. Is it like
Mm,
.ca?
Let me just check my email. Oh, I should stop recording.